everyone, it's Stephanie with the patient's story. I hope everyone's doing so great watching us, reading this, whatever form it is for the patient story. But I'm so excited to introduce our guest today, Ray, who's here to tell us all about his story with multiple myeloma. Ray, thank you so much for spending the time with me today.
It's my pleasure, Stephanie. My honor, and you're as a survivor and a fighter. A pleasure to speak with you. So looking forward to it.
That's so gracious. I just love being able to talk to people like you. And I know that you wanted to do this because you said you wanted to pay it forward and help other people where you can. And we'll make sure to get more into that. But I also wanted to ask you to just introduce yourself a little bit because we know that we are so much more than our cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, I like to think so. Although, my cancer diagnosis is also a big part of me now, right? My name is Ray. I'm a writer, a marketing writer. I'm also a musician. Live in the Bay Area. Married. Been married for a really long time, 27 years or so. Two children, a 25-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old daughter, and or a 23-year-old son, 25-year-old daughter. And was diagnosed with multiple myeloma.
I'd love to hop right into the story, Ray, because I know it was a little bit different for you. A lot of people will feel some sort of qualitative, life impact, and that's why they are alerted to something wrong. You were asymptomatic, you said. This is September of 2018 is when you sort of had your first, as you described it, quantitative sign that something was wrong. Could you talk about that?
For years and years and years, I've been a road cyclist, and it was a thing that I did to keep me in shape, and allow me to eat whatever I wanted to eat and drink whatever I wanted to drink. And I, being like most cyclists, would keep performance metrics. And in 2018, I guess it was, my metrics as a 54-year-old were every bit as good as they were in my late 40s. Right, so I was a beast on the bicycle, doing fine. Oddly enough, though, I was having problems with hemorrhoids, not so much with pain, but with just blood. And so I went to my gastroenterologist. I'd had a colonoscopy earlier in the year in 2018, and I know during the debrief of it, he's mentioned something like oh yeah, and you have hemorrhoids, and he just kind of went off on it, and went on to talking about more of the results from my colonoscopy. So I went and was like, can you tell me more about these hemorrhoids? And they're like, hey, don't worry too much about the hemorrhoids. It's just it's not going to turn into cancer or anything like that. But I was like, well, how do I know it's a problem for more advanced treatments or whatever? It's like, well, what's the symptoms? So I'm like, well, I have blood. And there's a lot of blood. And I'm like, well, I don't know any blood. Seems like it's a lot of blood. And so, well, are you hemorrhaging? I'm like, I don't know what that word means, but it seems super severe. So I'm going to say no to the hemorrhaging. And then I tell you, why don't we just do a quick little blood test? Routine CBC, and that routine CBC came back. I was, quite a bit anemic. My red blood cell count was 11 something. So off of that 13.5 or so, minimum. And I said, well, it's a low red blood cell count. Let's confirm it. Something weird could go on. But before I could get it confirmed, I got into a bicycle accident, and broke my eye socket and things like that. So it took me a little while to. I had other things on my mind. I had other things I was getting prepared for. Then it was the holidays and just natural, procrastination. January 2019, I went back for my follow-up blood test, and it also was anemic. In fact, a little bit more anemic. So I said, you are definitely anemic. So let's maybe see why. Let's run another blood test, a little bit more sophisticated, to see perhaps there's some indications that there might be internal bleeding. That came back still anemic, but negative to those indicators that might have internal bleeding. And at that point in time, he's like, well, we've gone as far as that we can go from a gastroenterologist type of perspective. Time for you to go to a hematologist. He referred me to one, and that's when I found out that, looking her up online, to make an appointment, hematologists are oncologists, and that's the first time it came to my head. It's like there might be something a little bit more to this. So that would have been around February of 2019, and having appointments with my hematologist oncologist. That was probably a 4-week, 5-week process as we began to work down what was causing my anemic condition. And after a couple of weeks and a couple of tests, we knew it was probably something that ended in an A. And then after that, bone marrow biopsy was the one that confirmed
Right.
her suspicions of multiple myeloma.
So, Ray, you're talking about the fact that you had life happen where you're supposed to get this follow up, but life happened, you got in this accident, and then there were the holidays. So, it's January when you finally get that follow up and you see the anemic levels again of the red blood count. Um, and then you have the in depth blood tests to see if there's internal bleeding, negative. What I find really interesting about this part is there's no mention of anything serious really yet. I mean, of course, internal bleeding, but in terms of cancer, it hasn't come up. You're looking up this person, this doctor you've been referred to. Can you just recall the moment when you saw, like, oh, hematologist is oncologist, which is cancer?
Looking up my doctor and seeing the oncology next to her. It was like a big shock. I don't think I'd even been thinking about it as a possibility, and I don't know what could have been the cause of my red blood cells being low, but cancer wasn't high on the list. I can't remember if I thought about it or not, but that was, like, oh wow, this is, I can be diving into a deeper pool than I want to be diving into, and that was the first kind of hint that was going to be the case.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that, Ray. It was jarring to see the cancer next to it. And then I know you ended up, this is about late February, you said, bone marrow biopsy. So was that done by that hematologist oncologist? And how did she describe what that would be, what you were testing for?
Yeah, we were, my wife went through this entire process with me. And, as jumping to an aside, if you know anybody out there that's going through any type of significant health issue alone, reach out to them and help. It is daunting. And she continues to be my rock. I mean, there is just so much that goes on with a serious health issue and our complicated healthcare system. We get something in the mail every single day. And that doesn't even count email, right? And there's a ton of correspondence, but there's you just need somebody next to you. I can't imagine going through it alone. My wife and I are sitting in the doctor's office. He goes, okay, next step we're going to do is a bone marrow biopsy. And I give it kind of like a little chuckle on a resigned chuckle on a roll of my eyes. And she's like, what's that about? And I'm like, well, come on, Doc. I mean, the bone marrow biopsy test comes with a reputation, right? There's some baggage that comes along with it. And she's always, some people don't feel it at all, and some people do feel it. And I'm, okay. It was given into the office a few days later. She didn't do it. Her PA did it. What I tell people, they ask me about my bone marrow biopsy experiences, is you don't want to consider it recreationally. It's a painful thing, and you just gotta suck it up and get through it. It doesn't last long, and thankfully it doesn't last long because uncomfortable. Yeah, so I can't imagine the people. My doctor saying, well, some people, just feel just a little bit of discomfort. I'm like, those people are way, way, way tougher than me, or they just don't have any nerves. I don't know.
Right. It's so fascinating asking this question to different people because it just depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's pain tolerance. Maybe, like you said, they have fewer nerve endings. I don't know what's going on, but yeah. Do you have any advice for people on getting through the bone marrow biopsy?
I've had two different bone marrow biopsies and two different approaches to it. The one that I had in my doctor's office was straight old, just pushing the needle in. I had another one over at the Cancer Center at Stanford University, and they used a drill. Scary sounding, but it didn't hurt as much. It was also my second one, so I kind of knew what was going in. But, my advice is you try to breathe, for one, breathe, focus, and some people take themselves to their happy place or whatever, find a spot in the wall that you stare at, but it's critical that you be still. There'll be probably a second person, an attendee at the biopsy, just to kind of hold your ankles down and keep you from rotating. It's important to stay still and just kind of get through it. And the worst part of the pain, is it isn't not just the injection, but it's also the kind of like, I guess for lack of a better word, the suction, so taking the bone marrow out. I think that may have helped the second time around. I had less cancer in my bone marrow. It was a little easier to draw out, and so maybe that contributed to some of the less pain. My initial bone marrow biopsy, they discovered that 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous. And so that's one of the things that I really like to bring up when I talk to people is that all this came from a simple CBC test, something that you should be getting once a year when you go see your doctor. If you do not go to your doctor, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? And I was, like I said, was performing exceptionally well on my bicycle, my performance metrics. I was feeling great, yet I had 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous, and I was anemic, right? I know a lot of people who are probably listening in today are cancer patients themselves. But even if you're just a patient caregiver or something like that, take care of yourself, go to the doctor. It's rule number one, go get your CBC. For me, that's the only reason I was diagnosed. And I was diagnosed way before multiple myeloma could become much more problematic. A lot of multiple myeloma patients get diagnosed with bone fractures, frequently compression fractures of the vertebrae. There's a patient in my support group who woke up one morning, first 2 steps out of bed, broke compression fractures in 3 of his vertebrae, lost about 2.5 inches of height in his first 2 steps out of bed. Other than that, he's feeling great. Go to the doctor going, well, this isn't normal. Doctor's going, it's not normal at all. Let's see why this happened. It's because, the bone marrow was so cancerous, it had gone into the bone, weakened the bone, and then had that fracture risk. So go to your doctor, people.
Go to your doctor, get checked out, and just regularly, right? Maintenance. And so I really am so glad for you, and that in your case, you're able to catch it early. And I know your blood test results had mostly stayed the same level, about just kind of on the lower end.
Yeah, from my first anemic test, I think it was a little worse to the second one. But the third follow-up was in close date range to the second one, so it was about the same.
Got it.
But within starting treatment, very quickly, within what I think my first blood test, or maybe the second blood test after treatment started, I wasn't anemic anymore. So I wanted to see immediate results.
And so let's get to that very important moment for so many people. You'd gone through a PET scan, right? And then that was before you got officially diagnosed. First, I want to ask about what's known as Scanxiety, right? Which is when you get something done, whether it's a blood test or a scan, it's really anything. And it's that waiting period of waiting for the results to come out. How did you deal with that?
I haven't heard the term before, but it's very real once things start to come up abnormal. I'd never had Scanxiety before because I was always expecting them to be normal. But then once they started becoming abnormal, there's the anxiety, even heading up to get it. It's like, I'll have my blood tested tomorrow. I'll go through treatment tomorrow. I'll get my blood tested again tomorrow, and then I'll have a doctor's appointment the Tuesday after that. I will live in a little bit of anxiety, like what are the numbers going to be? Are my cancer markers, back? Are they higher? And so on. So there is that, that anxiety. For some people, I imagine even happens during the scan. My PT scan was less. I've had a closed MRI before and an open MRI for athletic injuries. Closed MRI is much more anxiety for me, at least, because it's so extremely claustrophobic. And then the open one's different. The PET scan, is still that exploration phase. But yeah, it was, wonder what it's going to come back at. And, will there be literally holes in my bones that, requires an escalated treatment? In that case, it would be, radiation in addition to the other, and to, try to combat the bone loss that you have. And then, what do you do about, correcting that bone loss through various medications and the like?
No, absolutely. And so thanks for sharing that. I know that Scanxiety is just a word that is used in the community sometimes to reference that waiting period. But
and I didn't, as I sat in through group, I went to a group very early. I got diagnosed like March 11th. I think my first group was the very next week. And it was funny because a month or two later, as my doctor's kind of going through some resources, going, "There's a group. You probably don't need to go to that," And I'm like, "What do you mean? I've already been like twice." She's like, "Oh, yeah, you have." I learned about Scanxiety because the people, it's like, "Yeah, I've got they've got this test coming up, and now everyone's worried about what's the number going to be. Everyone's got a number and something, and they want this number to be within range or or lower or what have you, and there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that, and I think it's helpful to talk about it and let find out that you're not the only one who feels that way. And most patients are feeling that way, some degree of anxiety about what their test results are going to be.
100%. And we're going to dive into the need for a community later in this conversation because it's so important. Let's rewind to that date, March 11th. You've gotten all these tests done, you're waiting. Can you recall the moment you got the official diagnosis?
It came a bit more of a shock, I think, to my wife. We'd been sitting in. She had been in all my appointments ahead of time, but in the research that she was doing, she was, I think, she was hopeful, and she was thinking that was like a smoldering case of multiple myeloma, which I'm not exactly sure what it is. I was not going to Google and doing that thing because I know what a head game type of thing that could be. And I knew that it wasn't going to change anything. All that work I would do in between my bone marrow biopsy and my doctor's consultation afterwards, nothing I could do within that is going to change what my approach would be from that very moment of my diagnosis forward. Then that's myself working with the doctor. So all this other stuff didn't really matter. And I wanted to compartmentalize it as much as possible and work with what I knew and what I could do. And I didn't want to think about all the various possibilities, just type of way that I'm wired. My wife, Lori, is a little bit different. And I think she was kind of expecting, this be a smoldering case and it would do something, this, that, and that. I came in and I knew it was, because of the doctor's conversations that we had going up, it was probably going to be a lymphoma or multiple myeloma. And so, I at that time was tired of being picked on. I felt as though, I was getting poked and prodded. I don't particularly like needles to begin with. I'd given a lot of blood, had the bone marrow biopsy, and I sat across my doctor and said, "Doc, I feel as though I'm like a fighter in a ring, and I've been taking a whole bunch of punches. Tell me what it is, and let's start swinging and punching back." And she looked at me and said, "All right, you've got multiple myeloma." Was weird. Say one thing going into that ahead of time is if you're thinking it's like lymphoma or multiple myeloma, there's one that is incurable, multiple myeloma, and there's another one but treatable, and there's another one that is curable, treatable, curable, but also potentially, the mortality rate higher and initially. So, what do you even hope for? What are you cheering for? Is it, which way do you want that coin to land? So, she told me it was multiple myeloma. I think it came as quite a shock. My wife was very strong in the office, but when she got back in the car, she, immediately started crying. It was, but like I said, we had been kind of warmed up to the process that it was going to be something. And so it wasn't just out of the blue. We knew, both of us in some way knew that something was coming, and it turned out to be more significant than my wife was anticipating. For me, I didn't really have an idea about levels. It was more binary, yes or no. And we already knew it was going to be a yes. And that was just, which yes is it?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to talk about these different reactions, whether it's from the person diagnosed or the person sitting next to him or her, right? Caregivers, another topic we're going to talk about later. I like to call them unsung heroes because they do so much. So Ray, take me back. So this is an in-person appointment where you learned of the diagnosis?
Yeah.
Okay.
In person.
In person. So you're in person. It's so hard because there's so much information coming at you, but whether it was that appointment or another one, do you remember how your doctor was describing myeloma and your treatment options, what it was going to look like, your treatment plan?
I actually got a binder. It's like going up the first day of class. Here's a binder, a bunch of resources in it, and just what treatment was going to be with there's kind of a standard induction treatment for multiple myeloma. Part of my diagnosis involves some genetic testing, and the type of multiple myeloma is different for everybody. Mine's a aggressive form, and so knowing that, and knowing kind of the standard induction treatment that goes into it, that leads up to a stem cell transplant. All that was kind of laid out for me. So you'll be on these medications, this regimen, for a time period of 3 to 6 months or so. Then we'll be looking at a stem cell transplant. Described a little bit about what a stem cell transplant entailed, and then after post stem cell transplant, some sort of maintenance regimen to continue on. And kind of left unsaid, in the multiple myeloma world, I think it's we kind of look at things in 3-year periods of times, right? It's like get you through 3 years. And hopefully there'd be a more advanced therapies that come out within those 3 years. Then let's look at something else for another 3-year cycle. And just, so while you're going through, proven kind of best practices treatment now, the scientists are in the lab looking for new things like CAR T therapies, for example, multiple myeloma world right now. So it was laid out to me, a lot of documentation. In a way, I'm pretty blessed. I'm here in the Bay Area. Stanford is right across the water. Right across the bay is world-renowned hematology department and cancer center. So my doctor, my oncologist, is actually associated with Stanford University. So a lot of materials already off the press, ready to be distributed and help educate me as a patient of the road to come.
You had already done some research, or your wife had, or you guys had these conversations, and then you went in, it was yes or no, and it was a yes, you have cancer. How did you, because I know you have 2 grown adult children, a daughter and a son. How did you first deal with breaking it to them, and then the concentric circles out, maybe your other family, your friends? Did you want to be public about it? Did you want to be private? And any guidance you have for people on how to handle it?
Yeah, it's getting emotional just thinking about it. It's nobody knew that we were going to these tests. It was why get people worried about something that they might not need to be worried about, right? So it was just something that my wife and I were doing on our own. Nobody at my work knew, none of our friends, certainly none of our family. So it was cold. It wasn't a warm conversation. If you're a sales or marketing person, this is as cold a cold call as it gets. I didn't think about, and we don't have enough technology savvy with my dad, for example, to have done like a synchronous, type of Zoom call or what have you, where I could talk to everybody at the same time. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to work my way through time zones, work my way back. My daughter is at law school at Vanderbilt in Nashville. So I call her up, and I hadn't rehearsed anything in my head. And there's no user manual to talk about this with your loved ones. And so, I actually pull her out. My daughter at the time is 21, 22, she probably doesn't even know that her mobile phone is a phone, it's just some texting thing, an internet device, right? And so when she gets a call from her old man, well, that's something, she needs to answer that. So I actually yank her out of like a seminar that she's at. It's in the evening, her time. And, I think she answered the phone as like, what's wrong, and that gets me crying before I even start talking. And then, she hears me crying, and well, I'm her dad, and she's crying, and then she starts crying. She doesn't, so it started bad. And then just, trying to, nobody in my family had ever heard of multiple myeloma before. And, so telling her it was probably the most difficult conversation I've ever had with anybody. And it was just one person in my family. I still had ways to go. I still needed to talk to my dad, who, was in the central time zone. Then I need to talk to my son. It gets better, with practice. But the first one was extraordinarily heavy. I wish I had I wish I just hadn't jumped on the phone. I wish I had thought about it, maybe rehearsed in my head, had some messages that I wanted to clear out. Maybe there's a way I could have softly approached it with a text first, and kind of like warmed into a phone call, like, hey, do you have a moment really quick? Let's talk. I haven't talked to you in a while, and or something like that. But I wish I'd rehearsed it. certainly very emotional, very tough to get by. And there's no, it's like becoming a parent to a newborn. You don't get a user's manual when you become a parent. There's no user manual. There's a patient, like going, how do I tell my loved ones? And so it does get easier. It's funny. Just after I talked to my son, it was the last person in my immediate family. It was my daughter, my sister, my father, my son. Then a close friend of ours stops by. And my wife comes down and, why have you told them yet? And I'm like, well, no, I haven't, but and it does get easier, but very tough conversation. It's so tough that it's just emotional, just recounting that conversation almost 3 years ago. Tough one.
Especially with your daughter, when you were talking about that, I did notice the emotion, and I know it's been a few years since, but what is it that makes it still so like live right here for you?
Yeah, a great question, Stephanie. I don't know, just even when you talked about it there, I'm tearing up again. I don't know if you can tell, but it's, you don't want your loved ones to have anxiety. You don't want them to be worried. I think one of the roles of my father, being a father, is having her grow up in an environment where she didn't have to worry. And she, wouldn't have, excessive anxieties about stuff, and the uncertainty of the health of her father. I think it's, I spent all that time protecting her, and here is protecting her the best I can, and then here's a instance where I wasn't able to protect her, and so maybe that's part of it. It's interesting. You've given me something to think about. I'll probably be thinking about for a week of why that, even that emotional reaction, thinking about the emotional reaction from almost 3 years ago.
I don't think it's that uncommon either, Ray, because I think it speaks to the processing too, maybe, right? You went through this, and at the moment you were just dealing with it, but there's no, like you said, there's no guidebook. There's no like, well, it's defined. You get to process it from here to here, and then you're fine from this point on. And mine was 4 years ago, and same, sometimes I'll get emotional thinking about it, sometimes less so. But
and there might be maybe an internal perspective of that too, where it's the final building block that this is real for me, maybe. And maybe I hadn't thought about that, but it's like, maybe there's still a part of you that has not complete acceptance of it because you haven't told anybody, and if you haven't told anybody, maybe it's not real. So there's probably a component of that as well, and the realization is like, wow, man, I have cancer, and now my family knows about it.
it's a great point, right? It's the final sort of there's no denying it. It's right here, and it's confirmed because you're confirming it to your loved ones. Well, Ray, thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for asking the question. I mean, that's a good question. It was like I said, it's something for me to continue thinking about, and hopefully the people listening in, watching, also think about it and bear in mind some of the difficulties it is. Any advice I have is rehearse it out a little bit, think about what you want to communicate and how you want to communicate it.
100%. That's really great guidance. Thank you for sharing that, Ray. And we're going to now switch over to the next segment for folks. The next segment will be about the treatment, the first line treatment, and the side effects and how you got through it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.